Good evening, everyone. I'm so glad you're able to join us today. We're really looking forward to an exciting program, Kids and the TechLife Balance. I want to thank the Upper Dublin Education Foundation for their generosity in supporting this program and to be a part of our conversation for being our host and moderator as we get started. I'm sure everyone can identify with the issue that we're having currently in the TechLife Balance. And I'm hopeful that we will get some strategies that will not only support us as we work with our kids and our students, but also that maybe we can adopt for ourselves too, because sometimes it's a challenge for the adults as well. So having said that, I'm going to turn this presentation over to Kim Porter from being a part of our conversation, and we'll get started.
Thank you so much. Thanks everyone for being here, and I really appreciate, sorry about that, everybody joining us. So yes, I'm with Be a Part of the Conversation. Thank you, Dr. Perez, and everyone at Upper Dublin School District, and a special thanks, as she said, to the Upper Dublin Education Foundation. You all are lucky to have an organization that supports these kinds of extracurriculars sort of outside of the remedial information that schools need so much. Lots of really great stuff that they support. We are recording this program, but we will not be seeing on the recording any of your questions. All those will be just for the panelists to see. So you can submit questions at any time. You can follow up on this page by visiting our website, which is conversation.zone/technology. Judy Hirsch is also with us tonight from our organization, and she'll be putting some links into the chat as we go on through the program. One of the links she'll share with you is a survey link. When the program concludes, it will also pop up on your screen. Please take a moment to complete that survey. We truly appreciate your feedback. We do read it. We want to hear what you felt was helpful or not helpful, or what you would like to hear from us in the future. So we're very grateful to you for taking a moment to do that. Just a couple of notes about some programs that are coming up. We're partnering again with Upper Dublin School District and Education Foundation to present Isolation, the New Drug of Choice, with Dr. Caroline Finkel. That will be on Monday, April 18th, same time, same station, right here on Zoom. And you can register for that on our website, which Judy's going to share the link for our calendar, which will help you to find where to register for this. I also wanted to mention a program that is funded by Montgomery County Office of Drug and Alcohol. This is coming up on May 19th. We'll be talking about underage drinking. So we'll have some folks with us who work with teens and who also will be talking about, adults hosting parties and how to be cautious about that sort of thing. So that should be a really great program as well. And as I mentioned, check our calendar. We have a lot coming up, and we'd love for you to learn more about some of the programs that are on the horizon. We have these support group meetings also that take place throughout the year, throughout the summer, all of that. They're called parent partnership meetings. They're for parents who have identified a substance use challenge with their child, whether they're a parent, guardian, caregiver, child of any age, I should say too. Many of these meetings are currently taking place online. Some are in person. There's a section of our website dedicated to parent partnership that has this calendar with links to access the meeting information, whether it's a Zoom link or an address. You can find those right there. So really excited to introduce you to our guest speaker this evening, Mike Blanche. He is a licensed clinical social worker and the co-founder of Ethos Treatment. We are also really grateful that he serves as our clinical advisor for Be a Part of the Conversation. So you're in very good hands tonight. I will stop sharing and turn it over to Mike. Thank you so much, Mike.
Thank you, Kim. I really appreciate the opportunity, and Judy, and Be a Part of the Conversation, as well as Upper Dublin and the school district and the foundation for supporting all this, and your school district particularly. I'll put a plug in right away. April 18th is a fantastic speaker. Dr. Caroline Finkel is technically my wife. That's a technicality, but yes, she's a fantastic speaker and does an amazing thing. In lieu of, in part of my topic tonight around the impact of technology with adolescents and mental health and substance abuse and the tech-life balance of where we all are today and trying to learn. And I want to thank Dr. Perez in introducing myself that sometimes adults are a part of the issue. So it's not just kids and parents, and adults. We're digital natives to this whole world. Kids are digital. We're digital immigrants. Kids are digital natives. So when I first started giving this talk a long time ago, I was gearing talks to parent support groups of kids in, senior year, junior year, getting their devices for the first time. And now I'm in fifth grade centers, fourth grade centers, talking to parents about how they should have, right relationships with technology when they're in third, fourth, fifth, sixth grade. And we were talking right before about middle school ages and how complex that is. So I really am excited to be here tonight. I do want to start by saying a couple things right off the bat. First, I got 8 or 9 really great questions that I'm going to interweave in my talk tonight. But if you don't hear what I'm getting at, don't hesitate to put it in the chat. Don't hesitate to put it in the Q&A, whatever works. It'll be confidential. I won't say your name, and it won't be on the recording again. So don't hesitate to just kind of interrupt me, throw a hand up, or more importantly, put it in a digital kind of question piece if you have questions along the way. Know that I really appreciate your thoughtful questions. All the questions were really thoughtful about this complex topic. And so without further much ado, I'm going to get right into some of my pieces and why I started really talking about this. Some of the stuff has changed. Some of the information has shifted, of course, in the last 2 years with COVID. But some of the solutions and some of the focus is classic parenting pieces that hasn't changed. And just because COVID has pivoted us and changed us and made us to look to technology, it's here, it's not going anywhere, but it's how we integrate it, how we renegotiate it. That's the critical piece around this technology world, is we have to think of it as a part of our world, but that we want to define it as opposed to letting it define us. And so again, taking mindfulness about why is part of my first part of my lecture, and understanding the complexities of why is part of my lecture. And then I'll get into solutions. So it may at first be like, thanks, Mike, you're talking about the problem. I want to give a language to the problem. And so that's why I want to really start tonight by looking at this tech-life balance and what are some of the issues. Before I get too far, though, I want to watch out for one term that I want everybody to look out for. Is called fuddy-duddyism. Is everybody familiar with that term, fuddy-duddyism? So the term is basically, back when I was a kid growing up, my parents thought that rock and roll music was going to make me do drugs or alcohol, or that bad, whatever TV, the boob tube, and every generation had that, oh no, here comes this new thing that's going to really kind of mess up the kids. And again, kids, they're so accustomed to it. This is their world. This is what they were raised on. This is what they know. So we want to avoid fuddy-duddyism, or literally blanket statements of all or nothing, and this is the right, or this is the worst, or this is the best. And one of the questions was great. Is it binary where it's all good or all bad? Absolutely not. This is real world, real stuff that we have to have real conversations about and not be afraid to talk about. But let me get into why. Why is this a really unhealthy topic? Where is this problematic? And this term is the desensitization of culture, and what is happening and why are kids getting caught up. And the term is language and terms are being fragmented. Fragmented language leads to fragmented connection. Fragmented connection leads to really feeling isolated and more alone and isolated. And so the idea is that language and terms are getting shifted, communication's getting shifted. Foul language, one of the things I always talk to families about is, if you're not on your kids' video games, and you will really need to hear how the other kids are playing with each other to really hear how they talk to each other. Body image issues, the exposure to pornography is huge with kids, and how they get exposed to on these devices. This is a mini computer. I don't know why we still call this a cell phone. If everybody can see this, this is an iPhone. This is one of our devices. It's a computer. It's a mini computer, and they have access to more video games. For instance, one of the games I'll get into, Fortnite, completely shifted because now you can play live action on this device and keep up with your friends on the PlayStation 3 games. And exposure to multimedia. How many times have you walked home to your kid having Netflix on, their laptop out, and they're texting their friend on their device? and they have multiple things going on, and they think that's a norm, and they think they can get away with having a text conversation on one place, having a conversation with you, and watching a movie at the same time. And multitasking, is multitasking a real thing? And that's not really a thing. And research has shown that, multitasking doesn't really work. And lack of in-depth conversation, lack of developmental, real conversational pieces, as opposed to quick blips, quick, one-liners and headline news, is what we all been through in the last couple of years. And learning how to really kind of pause and really think more qualitatively about our informational highway. When it comes to mental health, the way that kids get shamed and verbal abuse and degradation of statements on a public level, meaning, one of my favorite stories, a true story real quickly, is this idea is when I would have a bad day at school, I would have a bad third period or a bad second period, whatever part of the day it was. And then I would have lunch, and then I would, get a bus ride home, and then get home and then play with my neighbor, Jeff Carr. And the next thing you know, I'd be hanging out with my buddy, and then go back to school the next day. And maybe, I would have, one phone in my house that had a landline that my two older sisters always won. And they would climb into a closet and they would talk to their friends. And maybe I would talk on the phone. But most often, by the time I would get back to school the next day, the best part of school is the next day would have a whole new drama, whole new problems, whole new whatever. But what happens in today's world in third grade, or I'm sorry, not third grade, in third period, during the day, a problem happens. Somebody posts about it, somebody Twitters about it, somebody posts an image about it, and the next, then it's talked about, then it's held on to, and then that kid with anxiety or depression may relive it and refocus it and pull it up and not have any process time and not really have detached time and go home and spend time on their device and not really have time away from whatever problematic issue they had that day. And so it almost cements and fragments whatever kind of emotional kind of dissonance they felt that day. And so there's no process time anymore. So kids get really stuck on one event and they get fixated on one piece of their day and not let a day go by and not have process time away from their day. And then they get back to school the next day. And that's what happens a lot of times. Another big thing is when kids post something or put something out at the public level, then, how many people liked it, how many people didn't like it, or how many people like them, or how many viewers they have, or how many people, and they get fixated on a number as opposed to the quality of friendships versus the number of friends that like or dislike something. And that's another huge consideration as well. And so when it comes back to this idea of, mental health and how this technology affects abandonment on a public level, that means when a kid, doesn't get the right feedback they want at that level, potential re-traumatization I kind of described earlier, potential of obsession relationships. And that idea is a lot of times when I'm working with kids that have a breakup or a bad relationship and a bad end, then they'll see friends post other images. We used to be up against the myth of a party that happened last weekend. Now we're up against the image of that perfect image of what happened last weekend. And the kid is experiencing FOMO. Does everybody know what FOMO means? Fear of missing out. And so many kids get caught up in that level of anxiety, even in the pandemic. I thought I didn't have to have conversations with kids around FOMO in the last couple of years, but pockets and groups of kids would still hang out and do stuff. And then the other kids that weren't invited, or the families that were COVID conscious appropriately, they wouldn't let their kids out. But so many of the other kids felt like they left out at a public level, felt, abandoned, left out, or didn't feel connected and feel fragmented. And that's a big deal. The other thing is guys or ladies that have bad relationships and then they try to look up their old partners online and then they see what they're doing, they see what their life's like, and they don't let go of that past relationship. I talked about principle of exaggeration. I talked about the importance of status updates. And I talked about FOMO and anxiety, but let me also talk about this principle of exaggeration. One of my favorite stories too, when it comes to kids with technology is, they'll also hype stuff up. And this came from a school working with a group of seniors 2 years ago, right before the pandemic started. This senior at a local high school was telling me he was at a boring high school party and he was sitting around and as every boring college or high school party goes, they were sitting on a couch, all sitting around on their phones. And he started scrolling on Instagram, and he started scrolling on people's stories. And he started to have a case of FOMO, a fear of missing out. He was looking at these images of his friends at a party that looked really good. And it looked like they were having a really good time. And he was all of a sudden looking at his phone, and he looked up and he realized, wait, that's Johnny, or that's Susie, or that's Sally. And what happened was 5 or 6 of his friends got up and they took pictures in another room, and then they came back and sat down. But according to Instagram, it looked like it was the coolest thing ever. So they were exaggerating and showing their friends what a great party that they were at. Meanwhile, he knew, and he talked about it, and his one friend was at that same party. It didn't seem that great, but according to social media, it looked like this big thing. We have a whole generation of kids, a whole group of young adults that are looking at college age kids thinking that that's what the real world is, or kids that are looking to this world. And social media, I'm not saying that social media is bad, but I try to educate kids and families every day. Social media lacks context, contextual pieces, the whole story. It's just an image, a moment of time. And somebody was just talking about how the person was in a really bad breakup, and he was emotionally distraught, but he had a really good day. And he posted a picture of a video of him playing guitar and singing a song. And the feedback he got was, hey, I thought you were going through a rough time. It looks like you're having fun. I hope you're better now. And he's like, no, I just had a moment where he felt good. And that moment gets looked at as like, that's how he is now. And again, social media lacks context, lacks total depth, and only gives you that momentary piece that people take out of context all the time. So when it comes back to the other aspects of why and how technology is challenged, when it comes to substance abuse, kids learn about it, the affordability, how-to videos, the accessibility point, insights to medication, anonymity to research and learn more about it. So again, I'm not saying that, again, the rock and roll music will make kids do drugs or alcohol, but I'm saying it's an accessibility point, affordability, it's an understanding about the drug culture. But again, this is where it gets to, and I want to fly through some of this just so we get to interventions, is what has happened as a part of updates around COVID-19. Rapid use of internet usage since 2020. How many people in here, had no idea? And my program is called Ethos. It's a substance abuse and mental health program for adolescents and adults. We had 4 locations. We had to flip to all telehealth one day, March 2020. And it worked, and we still have a telehealth division. And we're back in brick and mortar for most of our locations. But we all had to learn. How many adults had to learn how to work from home? How many people had to learn from how to work with being at home? But what had happened was all of us learned how to work from home and be at home. And now going back to work, now people going back to the real world are having a hard time going back in to the day-to-day stuff. And so a lot of folks are struggling going back into the real world of things, if that makes sense to people. So the use of WhatsApp increased so high, the spike of traffic as high as 70% of usage, bandwidth overloaded on the home front. Even tonight, I know I'm a little bit delayed in my presentation because my wife has been working from home the whole pandemic, and we have too much internet traffic in our home tonight, so I know I'm probably coming off a little delayed. And that happens all the time. 87% of the US population is on the internet, 100% are 18 to 35-year-olds are on it. Facebook is still leading use of internet users for social platforms. Monthly subscribers, 2.4 billion. And that was in 2019. That's way higher than this now. And Instagram, again, is up to 2 billion as well. And the amount of daily interactions with Twitter and LinkedIn are so massive. This is better, but it's good to see the differential of gender when it comes to daily time spent on the internet. So one of the questions somebody asked, like, what's normal or what's healthy or what's, but this is a gauge. Average use time, January 2022, 8 hours, 7 hours. I mean, that, if you think about the amount of time that's spent, if you spend 8 hours a day in school, 8 hours a day sleeping, and that's 16 hours, then you have 8 hours left, and they're spending this all online. You know, when it comes to the internet, this is their playground. This is where they're at. This is where they're at all the time. So again, to rule it out and say that we can't see it, we don't want to talk about it, that's unhealthy, but we need to reevaluate it and re-talk through it, and I'm going to get into it. This is really the real crux of this, though. If there's anything I really want you to get out of tonight is this slide. What does it mean, and why are kids really, and what is problematic with this amount of time that the kids are spending online? Dissonant tech time. What does dissonant tech time mean? It means mindless scrolling. How many people would say that they get caught up in the morning time and don't think about, you know, where they're at, what they're doing? And I always work with, and one of my favorite clients is a young guy, and he came into my office a couple of weeks, or actually, I'm sorry, he came into my office a couple of months ago, struggling with anxiety. He's a person in recovery. He's got a long-term sober, but his anxiety was off the charts, and he really wanted to see a psychiatrist. But before I did that, I always talk about sleep hygiene, nutrition, and other parts of their life, and working out. And I'm not opposed to medication. I work with great psychiatrists, but I always want to look and see what their environmental factors are that could exacerbate some of this. And one of the things he talked about, I just said, like, off the cuff, you know, and what's the first thing you do when you wake up in the morning time? He goes, oh, I turn my alarm off and I might scroll a little bit on my phone. I'm like, oh, okay, what's a little bit of time? And he goes, I don't know, an hour. I'm like, oh, okay. And then I said, what's the last thing you do before you go to bed at night? Oh, I check my, news feeds. I'm on my phone, and I usually am scrolling through. And do you ever have difficulty sleep? Sometimes, not all the time. I'm like, well, how long are you on your phone at night? And he goes, an hour. And I'm like, okay. So what I always like to say is going into sleep and coming out of sleep is probably some of your most neurological at-risk times. So I always try to talk to families about to pick your battles and pick your corners about why and when are we talking about limiting tech time. And one of the things that I always talk about is literally right before you go to bed and right before you wake up. And I asked this gentleman, do me a favor, get up out of your bed, take a shower, have a cup of coffee, start your day, and then think about, pulling out your phone, because he said it, he did that. And I said, the last thing you do before you go to bed at night, read an old school book, do something else besides staring at a screen. Because again, his mind at the end of the day was so tired, so exhausted, he would get caught up in thought loops that were anxious. And so a simple piece like that, after 2 weeks, his anxiety decreased so well. And the idea of the culprit was, at a most vulnerable time, when he would wake up in the morning time, his mind would roll into thinking about all the stuff he missed out of his friends that he was seeing on social media. And right before he was falling asleep at night, he was subjecting his brain to all these different multimedia pieces. And again, mindless scrolling, not thinking about it. So again, I'm not opposed to technology. I'm not opposed to tech time. It's tech balance. And the idea is that we got to look at not letting technology define us. But what he talked about, it was really great. He said, I got a better relationship with it when I'm awake and alert, and I get a chance to say how long I'm on it for and what I'm doing. And so that was an adult. That was a 23-year-old. And so that was a really important piece. So that idea is what mindless scrolling is that mindless watching any of the TV shows and not really thinking about it, not taking screen breaks. And that's what I was trying to get across earlier, of pivoting and talking about your time of day when you're most at risk, and making sure you have breaks. When I first started giving this lecture, I used to talk about technology-free nights on Tuesday and Thursday nights. Truthfully, it's not a thing. We can't do it these days. But can I have technology-free hours or technology-free zones or technology-free times? That absolutely. We were all at a dinner on Saturday night, a family dinner, big, huge family dinner, and all the uncles took all the kids' cell phones away from the kids' table just for an hour, and just to make sure all the cousins were able to talk to each other and not stare at their screens. And it was a great opportunity to not have screen time and trying to figure out, again, the right time and place. And so the other piece that we've seen is searching obsessively, be preoccupied with one corner of the world. And again, I'm not opposed to being passionate about a topic, but when they're just missing all the other components of it and people get locked into one piece of it. And then another big thing is only seeing this as one way to connect. And that idea is when I'm a big fan of connection, don't get me wrong, and using this as a connection, I'll talk about later. But if this is the only way they see a way to connect, that's my biggest issue. And then the other piece, like I talked about, how many people in here remember that idea of the news cycle would be you'd wait to watch one news program at the end of the day, and then you get your newspaper in the morning time, and that was the only time you had news. And so one of my clients did a huge thing. He was really struggling with the news. Here we go. The news, I have to make sure I'm not showing my phone of the confidential text coming in. But the news, now I'm stuck on the word, interruptions, and it was updates. And would you like to notifications? The term is turning off your notifications. I turn off all my notifications for my watch. I don't need any notifications on my watch. I don't need any notifications on my phone. And how many times do you really need to know, like, the certain news thing pop up, but picking your time when you want to invest it, as opposed to the amount of times I'm in a therapy session, the amount of times I've been in therapy sessions in person, and the client will hear their phone vibrate, and they'll be, oh, wait, 1 second. And they can't go an hour without I just need to, or when I'm sitting and doing a presentation or having a family meeting in a Zoom, and then someone says, oh, I just got to take this call. And think about the micro messaging. If I'm sitting, and I've had this conversation with families every day, your kid sees you pick up your phone, or you see your kids pick up their phone. You don't know what's happening on that end, and that might actually be important. But what that message is, what that micro message is, this device is more important than you. And do you want to send that message? And what I challenge people to think about is, when you're with somebody, be with somebody. And when you're open to and have time for this, it's an amazing exercise to be really, really present, as opposed to letting this vibrate, all of a sudden sit down. And how many people in here have tried to be on conferences and tried to be on work calls and been like this? You're gonna get caught up trying to do two things at once. Multitasking doesn't work. But more importantly, when you're with your family, with your kids, or how many parents in here have seen that, when you're with your kids and your kids, all of a sudden, they're gone. Whatever happened on social media, whatever happened on their text, they're just in another world, and you've lost them. So invite them, and that's what I'll get to in a little bit, to the conversation, as opposed to shaming them into it. So that's that one component around dissonant tech time. Teen time with their phones. This is really important for the schools to hear. As schools, you're not alone. 67% of teachers observe students being negatively distracted by mobile devices. 90% of schools surveyed see emotional challenges. Teenagers who spend 5 hours a day or more on electronic devices are 71% more likely to have suicide risk factors than 1 hour of use is the goal. And again, you saw the number of average users of hours in the last couple of years. And teens spend more than 5 hours a day, get a lot less sleep, and sleep is a huge thing. And then with 8th graders and social media, 20% higher risk of depression. 89% of parents blame themselves and caregivers for the responsibility of their children's phones. Parents, you're 1,000 school teachers. Parents, you're a great influencer. But know that your kids are so much, and this is one of the questions, so many of your kids are up against the wave of this technology, the wave of this device, that you're even fighting, trying to say, like, what Johnny's parents regulate and how Sarah's parents regulate this device. And so one of the questions I ask, and I love the wording of it, what do I say when my son says to me, but all of my friends have a video game, or all of my friends get more screen time? it's one of those things where it's all of my friends get to do X, all of my friends get to do Y. It's a classic kid split question. Kids are amazing lawyers, and you have to not to buy into what they say all the time, and check in with the other parents. And Kim, were you going to say something?
There's a question about, there's a question in the chat about the, does this include the time on schoolwork, the time online that they're doing schoolwork?
Gotcha. No, this is just pure play fun. This is not just for when they're on school time. So again, this is just their fun time, their social media, their whatever. But again, like parents have all this, fight that, well, Johnny's parents say this and Sally's parents do this. Talk to the other parents, talk to the other community members, talk to the other 40 some odd parents that are on this call tonight, because you're not alone, because so many other parents are struggling with managing the screen time. And there's not going to be one answer, and I'm not going to give you one answer, and I'm sorry about that, because it's not one kind of shoe fits all kid. It's learning where your kids are at the developmental stage, what their needs are, and how to be tactful and strategic with it. A couple other pieces that I always like to talk about when it comes to technology. The biggest one is loss of nonverbal cues. 87% of communication is nonverbal. My tone, the way that I'm speaking tonight, the way that I care about my words and my tonality of asking, how are you doing tonight? How are you feeling? And what's going on? And can I sit with you? And being able to look at somebody's eyes and see the oxytocin. Oxytocin is a real natural drug that gets released when I look at, my 3-year-old kid or my wife or a dog, we get oxytocin that released. When I'm staring at the screen, I'm sorry, I love doing these Zoom presentations, but I don't get that oxytocin release. Last week, I was privileged to do one of the first talks with Be a Part of the Conversation again, in person, live, in front of 50 some odd people. It was an amazing event, and that we were able to really talk, and having that 15 minutes after, that 15 minutes before in the parking lot of an event is so vital, so important for you to see other parents nod their heads. And so I can't tell you enough the importance of getting back into person for yourselves too, and knowing that nonverbal cues, nonverbal communication is 87% of communication. So when you text your kid, hey, I'm worried about you. Hey, how are you doing? What's happening? They read, hey, how are you doing? What are you doing? And they internalize it in a completely different way. And how they internalize it is how they react to you. And so it's learning how to invite them into a different way of communication, talk to them about how you want to sound, and so that you're not misread, misinterpreted is a part of that. Kim, were you going to say something to that? I'm sorry, were you just nodding in agreement? Okay.
I was just agreeing.
All right, cool. And so another component of, or Dr. Perez, were you going to say something? I'm sorry. Okay, good. I just want to make sure. And another core component of what part of the problems could be is setting up for impulsivity and not being able to have a pause button. So many of our kids go, I'll Google that, as opposed to learning how to sit with an uncomfortable moment and think about an answer, or pause and say, all right, I'll follow up with them later. So many of our young adults just jump to, well, I'll text them and I'll interrupt their life, before it's like, well, wait, let me just think about it. And again, this piece around impulsivity just feeds that next, if that makes any sense. And again, so many of our devices, so many different things are coming at us all the time. One of my other takeaways from tonight is, I don't want you to invest your time and energy in trying to figure out the next social media thing, the next piece. Ask your kids, talk to them. Tonight's lecture, I never spend time talking about specifics around certain parts, because it's ever evolving and ever changing. And then so many people wanted me to talk on the meta universe. When I talk to kids, they're not there yet. The meta universe is a concept of an idea, but in their world, they're still happy as all get out on these little devices, talking and texting all day long. So watch out for like the next shiny kind of thing to worry about. Keep focused on your kid, keep focused on your parenting, and I'll talk more about that as I progress. So look out for all the next shiny pieces of all these different things happening. The real thing that I want to ask you, is this your family dinner table? Is this how you guys are interacting? As I said earlier, parents are 1,000 school teachers. and I respect school teachers, especially the last 2 years. Oh my gosh, I give you so much credit for what you've lived through the last 2 years. But as families, as individuals in your home front, parents, kids watch what you do versus what you say. So you might have a great rap about technology, but kids are watching how you interact with your devices. So my big ask is to consider, how are you interacting with your own device? And is this how you're interacting with your device? I love and hate these pictures all at the same time, where the dad's looking at his phone and the kid's looking out, catching a moment, and all the families are preoccupied and not looking at each other and disconnected and not seeing the moments. So I can't tell you enough, don't miss the moment. Don't miss opportunities of the nonverbals. Don't miss the interaction of the kid, and try to model the modern family in a different way. We've all been through this storm called COVID. We've all been trying to figure this thing out, but we all haven't been in the same boat. We've all had different resources. We've all had different expectations put on us. We've all had different kind of expectations and realities. And we all have to learn how to live in some of the ambiguous loss that we've been through. And we learn how to live and love and go through this next chapter. A lot of what we saw in the last couple of years is fatigue and burnout of the home working environment, and how to kind of keep excited about working from home as families and schools and everybody. And we all got burnt out in the last couple of years. But as we're getting out of this, we need to pivot. And pivot is to change a strategy without changing in vision. I love this definition so much, and that's why I stop at it. And that idea is pivoting back to our world, pivoting back to the importance of what we want to get at from education, from connection, from development, is changing the strategy sometimes of how we get there, but not changing our vision of our principles, of our truths, of how we want to help our kids. Now what? So now what do we do after the last couple of years? So many questions were related to, kind of what we've been through, but now how are we dealing with this? So is it okay to reclaim your relationship with technology? Yes. Is it okay to reevaluate and renegotiate and have better relationships with it? Yes. Can you do that now? Yes. And just because you've started a trend in the last couple of years doesn't mean this is how it's going to go. You can, as parents, renegotiate and reclaim your relationship with technology for yourself, and you can help your families. There was a tough thing, I think, that happened this school year, where a lot of schools, and I don't know Upper Dublin well enough to say this, but I know a lot of other schools were like so excited to be back in person and so excited and pressing to kind of be back to normal, when it wasn't all the way back to normal in a lot of respects. And there was a lot of families that were kind of pivoting back and forth, some hybrid versions. And so this year wasn't the best real back to real world. Not to say that next year will be either. I don't know. But what I do know, though, is there was a lot of expectations put on teachers, put on schools this year to be back to normal. And it wasn't. And so many of our kids, this adjustment back didn't really adjust well. How many people in here like change? How many people in here like being told what to do? How many people here just well within days? It takes a lot for us to change and pivot. We all had to a couple of years ago at the beginning of COVID. And now as we're getting out of it, it's a kind of a back and forth game. But we have to reclaim at some level our relationship with technology. So that means you can renegotiate your relationship with technology. That means you as parents have every right to have difficult conversations and begin today and say, how do you want your relationship with technology to look like? And that's a critical piece. So reclaiming your relationship is number one. Number two is education on how complex these products really are. One of the questions was, is there any quick things to talk about or send to kids? I love that Netflix documentary that came out last year. And Kim, I'm going to ask you a huge favor. I forget the name of it. Do you remember the name of that?
The Social Dilemma.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I always struggle with the name of things. The Social Dilemma, I think, is probably the best engaging documentary out there. I tell families to watch it in 2 or 3 parts because there's so much to it that one sitting, one night, I think is too much. And it goes in a lot of different directions. But just to really have a place to talk about. breaking it up in 3-night videos to have a conversation and say, like, what do you think of the progression? What do you think of their relationship with technology? Do you think it's real? Do you think it's really happening? Educating yourself around the complexity of these topics are huge. And so many people think like TikTok, for instance, is like, just another social media thing. It's not. The amount of algorithms, the numbers, the research behind TikTok, it is the most thought out program that really looks at how kids interact. They literally have it down to a science of how long you're scrolling and how long it takes you to swipe. And if your literal finger is holding a second too long, that means you might be interested, and it almost catches people's subconscious to what they're interested in. And so when it comes to the algorithms behind TikTok and the addictive nature behind it, it's not like anything we've ever seen. And so I caution people around, like, as we get into video game production and talking about certain apps, we got to be really mindful of. I educate the kids. My favorite line to say to adolescents, my favorite line to say to kids is, do you like being told what to do? Most kids do not like being told what to do. And I say, good. I don't want technology to tell you what to do. I don't want an app to tell you how long you're going to be on this for. And once a kid figures out that they've lost control sometimes on the time of how long they're on it for, or video game production of video games, like a game like Call of Duty, had 10 years of gamification, of research, of gameplay. So kids, you have to know, they want you to play longer. They want you to play more in-depthly. So when they came out with this free game called Fortnite a couple of years ago, in its first year in 2019, it made $1.8 billion in its free version, because of, you get to a level and then you need to pay to play, or you can buy these skins, or you can get into this room and you could possibly win these 3 boxes, but you have to pay a certain level to get the certain thing that you might win. The same neurologic event that happens when you're playing video games is the same neurological event when you're gambling. And so when it comes to what is happening neurologically with the kids in video games, is they're not seeing how addictive it is when it comes to the reactionary place of their thumbprints, that literally their reactive states, they're almost subconsciously playing so many of these games. How many parents have seen their kids play video games and they have no idea that the kid is going as fast as they are, or texting as fast as they are, because the kids have gotten so in-depth in it. Another piece around video games is the average age of an online video game is 32 years old. So, do I want an 11-year-old kid playing with a 32-year-old? Where is that 32-year-old in life? And that's the average age of a video gamer. So thinking about what your kids are exposed to, who they're talking to online, our backyards got really big. So educating yourselves on that type of video games they're playing, what draws them in, what games do they like, as a conversational piece to really interrupt it and to kind of see where it's at, as opposed to just saying it's bad and scary, as I am at the moment, but to really talk with them and educate them on how complex these topics really are, and raise in a conscious consumption of what they're consuming in technology. This idea is that, like, we want to be conscious around what our intake is. Like, I think about how much water I drink a day, or what I eat, my nutrition. It's about what we intake a day. But if you think about, our lives are really short, so we want to think about how much technology we're input in a day, and what our mindless scrolling is, to what video games we're getting exposed to, and the violence or whatever that they're playing on. We just want to be mindful of what they're on. Some games, and again, this is where I don't want you to feel bad. Some games are strategic levels. Some games are playing with a team. Some games are learning how to play with each other, and strategy games are learning games. But some games, literally just the one-pointed short shooter games that are just at it, to have them play longer, those are the ones that I really worry about, how long they're playing for. I spoke for a school for Kim not that long ago, last spring, where one of the students was a big celebrity because he won, a video game series. And again, being that kind of series winner, it's kind of like, look, that's what everybody's looking up to, is that maybe that I could be that kid and be the next video game winner. Well, the reality is that the amount of time of play the kid has to play to win is so acute. I mean, it's so high. So when it comes to tech time, when it comes to how long they're on, we got to talk about what they're consuming, how long they're consuming, when they're consuming is what I was trying to talk about earlier. So interventions for families. I've touched on them. I've ran through these because I'm always afraid of time on these things. This is usually like a 3-hour lecture. I'm trying to fit in a 90-minute time. So I always try to fly at times. But the intervention, my favorite intervention is communication. When I talk about communication, the first piece around communication is when and how do you talk to your kids about technology? Do you talk to your kids in a car while you're driving to school at 8 a.m. when you're running late and you have 300 things on your mind? Probably not the best time. Do you try to talk to your kids at 10:30 at night when you're exhausted, they're exhausted, and oh, wait, I got to talk to them about a video game. I saw that lecture the other night by the guy Mike Blanche. I should talk to them now. Just as a heads up, no. I don't want you trying to have a conversation when you're exhausted. I don't want you to have a conversation when they're exhausted, where they feel trapped is the line that I hear every kid say is like when I get stuck in the car with their parents, they feel trapped. Although so many parents walk in my office and go, but Mike, that's when I see them all the time when I'm driving them somewhere. And I'm like, we got to make more time. We got to find different time. We got to find real time to have real conversations. So making time to have communication, reestablishing new time, having technology-free nights, having a technology-free dinner, having a technology-free zone. That PS, you put your device down. That PS, everybody puts their device down in the home so that everybody models the healthy behavior to have real communication around. We want to start to reestablish better relationships with this. We want to talk through some of this with you and to have a real conversation when you're ready for it, because it is difficult. Another one of the interventions is to listen. Listen to your kids about what they're getting from it. What do they gain from it? What part of their world, who are they on their games with? Because it's interesting. Certain kids only play online with their real IRL friends, in real life friends. So many kids are attracted to just play with and stay connected. I have a lot of kids that come to me that, they're only playing video games with the kids that they know in school. It's just a different way to stay connected, and they don't really even like video games, but it's what they're doing right now, and they hope to do something later in life. Those are the kids that I'm not really worried about, that they can kind of put it down or leave it or go on vacation and not worry about it. But the kid that really comes in, that has to pack their bags with their video games, going on vacation, worried if they have Wi-Fi, wherever they go, those are the ladies or gentlemen that I really worry about the most. But back to, when it comes to interventions, communication is huge. Listening, hearing what they're not saying, hearing what's going on, hearing what's happening. So many people come in for video game addiction or internet addiction, but really have anxiety, really struggle with depression, and don't know how to manage their anxiety or depressive clusters in different ways. So they try to self-regulate with this. How many times have you been, I'm sorry, I keep flip-flopping back and forth with the PowerPoint. I hope that's okay. But how many people in here have been online or in line at Starbucks, or been in a momentary kind of meeting, or I've been to meetings where at the beginning of the meeting, it's really slow to start. So everybody pulls out their device. Everybody looks down their device, as opposed to just looks up and says, how you doing? How's your week? What's going on? And there was this great meme that was going around that, oh my gosh, some psychopath asked me how I was doing in line at Starbucks. And it's like, what happened to that age when people would just stop each other and say, hey, nice day. I'm the guy, I got a lot of dad jokes recently, that, I'm the guy that opens the door and says, welcome to Starbucks. I hope you have a great experience, because I'm, sponsored by Starbucks still. But that idea is that, like, we need to talk as opposed to text, and use this as the only way to connect. So the next time you're at a meeting, the next time you're at an awkward start of one of your staff meetings or life meetings or school, think about not pulling this out as a way to self-regulate, but times that by 100. That's what kids do with anxiety. Kids with anxiety don't know how to internally regulate, so they turn to these devices to emotionally regulate, because there's this illusion of control. So kids with obsessive compulsive disorder, anxiety are really kind of what I'm worried about most, and they need to treat their anxiety as opposed to this device they look to. And that's the kid that can't shut down their device or may come off refusal or may come off depressive or may come off angry. Because adolescent depression doesn't look like they pulled a wool over their eyes. Adolescent depression, kid depression looks more like anger, reactions, difficulties with not being able to communicate and come off as reactive and angry. I just worked with a family not that long ago that was diagnosed oppositional defiant disorder, a real diagnosis. But when we broke it apart, the kid hadn't slept that well and was really irritable and agitated and had no idea that he wasn't sleeping that well and didn't realize he had no emotional regulation skills, was over dependent upon this thing. And his parents took this away thinking that they were doing a good thing. But then more and more symptoms came out. And then somebody misdiagnosed him as oppositional defiant when they really had a lot of depressive cycles that they need treatment for. So really listening is kind of paying attention to what's underneath and listening to your folks or your clients is what I put for this professional talk around their relationship with technology. So educating and providing insights on regulation skills and decreasing stress around it. One of the questions which I loved was, is all technology bad, and can they use technology? I think the exact wording is, can they use technology for like art or drawing? Or absolutely, there could be an equal amount of time to using technology in a healthy way to draw, to write, to look up, to be an artist. So again, learning what and when and where technology is actually a fine thing, and then educating, providing insights when it's not a good thing when it comes to this unhealthy emotional regulation skills, that dissonance part of the lecture that I brought up earlier. Evaluating friends online, evaluating their exposure at risk, evaluating how and who they're talking to online is what I was kind of alluding to earlier when it came to the average age of an online video gamer is 34 years old. So it's really important to think about, what it's like to, who are they talking to, where they're at, where they're spending their free time, who are they talking with online. And again, some of their friends could be, in real life friends that they're really talking to in school and they just happen to follow up online. And sometimes these people they've never met before. Way early on in my career, so I've been in substance abuse and mental health for about 28 years. And this is 20 some odd years ago. I remember because it was right at the dawn of a lot of social media. Actually, it was pre-social media stuff. I was working with a young lady who struggled with anxiety, depression. And then she started talking about a boyfriend. And she was really excited to meet the boyfriend. And she was really excited about spending time with the boyfriend. And then as the sessions progressed, I realized she said, meet the boyfriend in person for the first time. And what I realized was she had an online relationship with this person, called him her boyfriend. And it was my freshman mistake to not ask, is this person a person in real life, or is this a person that you met online? I swear, since that person, now it's a part of my online assessment for relationships. Is this a person in real life, or is this a person you met online? And what it turned out to would be a catfish person that luckily, the person wasn't real, but luckily we figured that out before she got on the bus to drive down and fly, or go on a bus down to Florida to meet this person for the first time. And again, this susceptibility as a freshman therapist, not thinking about asking whether or not this person was in real life, I was like, oh my gosh, and so again, when people talk about friends or people talk about their influencers or something like that, our avenue of influence has gone way far out. And social media influencers have an interesting kind of impact on our kids and our youth. And a lot of it has to do with images and not about depth or context of what's really happened in people's lives. So many of our kids compare their insides to other people's outsides. So many of our youth in an unhealthy way are saying, I don't match up. I don't look like what their threads are. I don't know how they're getting their images. Because again, the amount of filters, because the amount of time and energy spent to make somebody how they look. I was really educated once, and you can talk to your kids about this, about the apps that'll make somebody look thinner, have a different look to them, a different tone to their skin, or a different eye color. And somebody was showing me the images of themselves on their social media page, and I didn't recognize them. And that was the therapy, is learning how to help this person match their insides to their outsides of how they really looked in real life with how they presented online socially and social media. Because again, these apps distorted themselves so much, and it affected their self-worth, self-confidence, that that's what they thought was reality. So when it comes to education and talking through and having conversations and evaluating what happens online activity, this is critical to really understand what's happening. Now, again, this last thing, learning about the new apps or new games or communication, all I want you to do is at least to know the language. I don't need you to know every part of the parcel, because like Snapchat or Facebook or some other social media will come up. I remember my wife, who's giving a talk for you guys in a couple weeks, she was talking to an adolescent, and she said, I had to change my profile picture. The kid said, "What's a profile picture?" And she said, "Oh, it's a Facebook thing." And the kid said, "Oh yeah, my parents have Facebook too." And so many youth see Facebook as for the adults and Instagram for maybe the teenagers or high schoolers or college kids, and TikTok and everything else for everybody else. And it's 2 years from now, it's going to be something else. 5 years, going to be something else. But think about it, just to learn about it, so you have some level of communication around it, because that's their world. You want to meet them where they are, but you don't have to know everything. You don't have to hear everything. You don't have to understand everything. I mean, my big piece is to look at just even knowing the language is so vital, knowing some of the elements of it, so that you don't sound like you don't know nothing. So at least meet them where they are and have some context of everything else. So as families, one of the other great questions is, how do you talk to the family? How do you want to be with the family? Or I forget the exact wording, but this was in response to a family question. This is how to create family culture around screen time, and digital dignity, and raising awareness around what's called digital footprint. And so I work, and I've worked at colleges and universities, and some schools will say this to kids, that, your admissions program will look at your screen time. Your admissions programs at certain universities will. That's not technically accurate, but who will definitely look at your social media context, who will definitely look at your screen time, who will definitely look at your digital imprint, are jobs and employers, are people that are giving out scholarships, are coaches. If any kid wants to be playing for a collegiate level sport, I talk about this at the middle school level, to think about your digital presence, to think about what's out there, what's on there, because again, college sports athletes, kids, and also definitely employers down the road will look at your social media presence as a part of the hiring process today. I don't know if it's fair. I don't know if it's great, because I don't know about you guys, but I'm grateful that my parents didn't hear every conversation I ever had or saw every image I ever put out there. I'm very grateful about that. But the truth is, today's world, this is in everybody's back pocket. And then the next thing you know, an image gets out there, and the next thing you know, it sticks around. So educating the culture around digital dignity and digital footprint is massive. And that's when I said earlier about educating your kids, like, this is the legacy. Well, how do you want to present? And I know kids struggle with seeing how 5 years down the road, what that's really going to look like. But again, we want to think about how they're interacting today with it. And again, challenging them to think about it is really the goal. Does that make sense to people? I saw one question pop up, or two, and I just want to make sure. I'm going to just read the one.
Every addiction, you got it.
So I'll read it. Every addiction to video games is considered anxiety or depression. How do you distinguish? So I'm going to reframe the question. If I don't answer it, try to re-ask the question to the person asking. Everything could be addictive. Everything could be anxiety and depressive. And I'm sorry that I don't know if you can hear my 3-year-old in the background. Oh, it's okay. Okay. So everything could be addictive. Everything can be. However, the short version is, it's it's how the kids are approaching it, how they're responding to it. And my other big question is how they can put it down. One of the ways that we figure out how challenging it is for an adolescent or a young adult, how addictive it is can they put it down for a period of time, or what's their relationship, and can they develop other parts of themselves?
I think Mike is actually asking if every addiction to video games is considered anxiety or depression, and how do you distinguish? So maybe trying to understand the underlying reason for the compulsion to play video games.
Thank you for reframing. So as a standalone, I'm hopeful in the next DSM-5 there will be technology addiction. I understand it as a standalone ailment, addiction, as a process addiction, as a term that we use a lot, that the kids get caught up in chasing an external to make their insides feel better. Kids can do that with a drink or a drug from a substance abuse standpoint. They could do it with how they look in the body image. They could do it with relationships or money or sex, but technology. So how kids get addicted to technology is a really big deal. So as a standalone, what the difference is increased use. There's like 3 or 4 criteria for having an addiction. And one of the criteria is increased use. And so like may start out an hour a night, then it's 2 hours a night, then it's 7 hours a night. And the next thing you know, they can't even know when they stop and start. They're using it so much. Another big criteria is using despite adverse consequences, meaning they're staying up all night. They're interrupted with the sleep pattern. It's affecting their hygiene. It's affecting their relationships. It's affecting their schoolwork. So they know they have a big test on Friday, but their video game they can't put down Thursday night. So one of the definitions of addiction is using despite adverse consequences. Another piece of it is going through withdrawal and not being able to literally sleep without it. And they feel so dependent. They're so mentally preoccupied with it that affects how they function and how they are. So as a standalone addiction, the process addiction interferes with those 3 criteria, mainly the most. There's other criteria I can get about, but those are the ones that stand out the most. When it comes to anxiety, depression clusters, it's a different diagnosis, but a lot of times kids, they're drawn to self-regulate because they have depression, anxiety underneath. So they try to self-regulate by using technology. And once we treat the anxiety or depression, they don't need that self-regulation skills. Once they find other coping mechanisms to deal with their anxiety and depression, like connections, outlets, yoga, breathing techniques, other outlets. And again, one of the questions was, does it need to then just be sports? What about a kid that's not really just an athlete? Getting them involved in the community, getting them involved in volunteer work, getting them connected somehow outside of themselves, outside of their house. I'm a big fan of volunteer work in the community because it could get them exposed to what's bigger than themselves. Artwork, expression work, drama, plays, anything that's in person in real world, hopefully as we get out of this is great. So again, if your kid's not an athlete, music, anything to get them around other kids, to get them exposed to things so they learn about how to just interact with kids without their devices. So Kim, was there a follow-up question to that, or do you think that?
Not with that. There's an anecdote that someone shared that I think is really interesting, and this person thanked you, but so there's a parent who is a Girl Scout troop leader and said, just anecdotally to let us know that they're planning their first camping trip, and had an open Q&A. One of the girls asked if she could bring her iPad on the camping trip. The parent said no, and she was surprised. Then when she explained that camping time is troop fun time, and then she seemed to understand, and that it's a real issue for all of us. And I just wonder what your thoughts are about that, Mike, and if you have any predictions about how that's going to go.
I thought it was great that they're still, tried and true to the troop direction and the troop value of having camp time. That's huge. Because again, so many people think, oh, technology is now a part of everything. And it's like, no, there's going to be real time at a campfire or doing stuff that you need to have that time. There's a lot of rehabs that I work with, a lot of residential programs for mental health and substance abuse issues I work with. And those ones that are most successful really do take that in effect, that they don't want people on their devices while they're there for a period of time. They really do need time to unwind and disconnect. Interaction with the future, I really hope that a lot of places stay true to their missions, that they don't have that time. And Dr. Perez, were you saying that as well, or what do you think? I saw your head nodding in agreement, so I wanted to get your input.
No, yeah, no, I absolutely agree. And I think, there are those times, be it in our personal life or business life, or in school with the kids, there are times that we put the technology down and we don't use it. And we need to stay true to that. Even something as simple as a read aloud, for the teacher to do the read aloud with an actual book versus throwing a video up, which is okay once in a while as well. It's nice with it if they have good illustrations and things like that. But, do it the old school way by reading the book, and, help make some of that separation so that we can teach kids how to use technology appropriately and as the tool that it was meant to be.
100%. How many people, like reading classic paper books, or paper newspapers? And again, the reason why I like them is because I'm looking at too many screens all day long. So when I get a chance to actually read, I was kidding with Kim earlier. I printed off the questions. I have 2 screens and I'm ready to present, but I still like having, some documents printed out, and being able to read old school is so helpful. So again, creating that balanced time and that reflective time, and again, having technology-free zones are really important as well. So camps, events, that's a really good thing as well. Let me go back to a couple interventions if I can, and then I'll ask for more questions at the end. And I apologize, I lost this somehow. There we go. So how to create a culture for family screen time, providing initial contract or renegotiating time. So many of our families just didn't have a contract, and it doesn't mean that it has to be like this 20-page document, but it could be just a verbal contract to say, hey, listen, we really want to start to renegotiate our relationship technology, and you can have technology contracts at any time, but especially if the kid is showing you some signs that they can't regulate themselves. That's when you as a parent may need to step in and say, okay, we've tried it your way for a period of time. Now let's try to renegotiate and have some clear boundaries on, 10 p.m. is a cutoff time for screen time, or, only an hour on a video game at night, or only 2 hours, but you get to pick, and I'm going to give you 2 hours. And I want to make sure before 10 p.m. or after 3 p.m. and giving them some kind of feedback is really important. And I talked about the digital footprint is really important, and the digital dignity. But more interventions is really important. Create technology-free time, therapeutic events like camps or other things. Live by example. Look at yourselves, your own interactions with the devices. And again, parents are 1,000 school teachers, so kids watch what you do. So important. Attachment theory is a complex theory. I do want to talk about again when it comes to this oxytocin. When I look at people's eyes, when I look at people, when I see people and they're looking back at me, that connection is so much more vital than looking at a screen. So I can't recommend enough, when you have technology-free time and you're being able to attach and be present with your loved one, that's a vital piece as well. So learning how to have that connection, that relationship connection is so vital. How do you recommend, okay, so I'll ask this question. How do you recommend navigating play dates where one child has an iPhone and others don't, especially in the elementary school level? When it's pulled out, the other person with technology automatically becomes the most popular, and it's unfortunate to be a reality. So definitely when it comes to, I've seen that happen on hundreds of times. Talk to your kids. If your kids are not that kid, so other kids are like attracted to that one friend has the older sibling's phone or the parent's phone because they're, needing it for something. But talk to your kids about it before and afterwards, and let them know that it's not just about that event or that moment. Because think about the micro messaging is that kid's worth comes from this device and not about what they're bringing to the table. And it's an over attachment to meaning to this device, as opposed to that person as an individual and what they're saying and how they're conducting themselves. So that's a great question. Another part to this managing is accepting technology is here, not avoiding it, not trying to be a fuddy-duddy about it, but to really kind of embrace it and talk about it and really kind of and say that it's here and learning how to talk through it, listening to your kids and saying like, what do you want your relationship to look like? And if you really talk to kids, they don't like being told what to do. They don't want technology to win. They don't want technology to be the overriding factor. But again, it's been so subtly kind of pulled into our culture that we need to have clear conversations. And again, this was pre-pandemic that we were having these talks with Cam, and I was doing this tech talk. And all the pandemic did was rationalize a lot of unhealthy relationships with technology. And now as we're getting out of it, we just need to be real mindful and respectful as we're getting out of it, to be really thoughtful about what do we really want our relationship to look like with technology. We have to reevaluate and we have to readjust our goals with technology in our families. And again, do you want this to define your relationship with you guys as a family, or do you want you guys and your say to really define your relationship as a family? Now, here's the good news. Technology is not all the enemy. Technology actually provides more research, more up-to-date information, GPS accountability, access information in healthy ways. I used to send families to Barnes and Nobles to buy a book that they were afraid to buy because they didn't want their neighbor's kid to check them out at Barnes and Nobles. And now they're being able to kind of download a quick thing. Or today I saw a client and was able to text them a link to a TED Talk. And it was so amazing for them to feel that and see that. And it was such a great thing. They can monitor trends and educational trends and really share informations. And that's huge, as well as gaining insights into diverse cultures and experience and global awareness. That's huge as well. There's technical support. There's ongoing support, downloading meditations, downloading lectures, access to research anywhere, anytime, free anonymous support, and FaceTime with friends. I'm just trying to end on the positive stuff that is available to you guys as families. So I apologize, I was racing toward the end because I wanted to make sure I got to the last couple of slides. But is there any other questions? I just wanted to give some more time at the end. Was there any questions? I thought I saw another one pop up. I'm sorry, I was racing.
I don't think so. I have a question for you. If you don't have anything else to share, go ahead, Rita. Go ahead.
Oh, okay, thank you. So as a parent, I'm just wondering, what resources are out there that I can access to help me learn about video games and learn about these upcoming trends? One of the resources that I'm familiar with as an educator is Common Sense Media. I don't know, what your thoughts are on that in terms of being able to see
trends and what's happening. That's a great resource. So Common Sense Media. As a follow-up, this lecture, but then also my PowerPoints, as well as other links to other resources, be a part of the conversation, not to plug Kim's organization. I send everybody to that website because on there's tons of resources and tons of online information that we try to update all the time. We have to update more. But again, the sharing it as much as you can. So within the school context, but be part of the conversation. Their website's pretty amazing. And it's not just their organization. They have links to a lot of different other pieces as well.
Terrific. Thank you.
Sure.
I would add to that. Yeah. So that follow-up page that Judy's been putting in there, conversation.zone/technology, that does have a lot of resources. And I just added the website for the social dilemma. So there's actually a website associated with that documentary on Netflix. They have a lot of resources. Also a movie that came out, I'm sure many of you are familiar with, a number of years ago, called Screenagers. They have a weekly newsletter that is awesome. They call it like Tech Tuesdays or something like that, Tech Talk Tuesdays, something. The founder of that whole project is a pediatrician, and she is constantly putting out some really great information. So there's a link to that on that section, and I'll add Common Sense. That's also, as you said, a really good one.
Screenagers was an amazing film, and then they did a follow-up film for that. And the most interesting piece about that was it was a high school student that was talking about getting her first phone, and now we're talking about middle schoolers and fifth graders. And she was worried about, as a pediatrician, dealing with her ninth grader, and it's such a different world even since it came out. But again, looking at ways to educate yourself and connect. One of the questions I didn't answer, and I apologize, is there any apps about monitoring apps that they think are effective? And I always caution this because I work with a lot of parents, then they live on that and they don't really have conversations. Yes, there's Bark. Yes, there's other kind of ones out there. Bark's the one that's pretty well respected. when it comes to a monitoring app to monitor your kids' connections online. But again, I'd rather steer you into having conversations with your kids on a regular routine basis than getting lost on monitoring the keystrokes and monitoring what they're doing, as opposed to having frontline conversations with you. That's all. So you guys had great questions. Kim, did you have a question from earlier? I'm sorry.
And I was just going to say, I thought this was just an interesting thing I wanted to throw out to you. So I don't know if anybody watched the Oscars last night, but it was rather interesting. And this morning, I was listening to a conversation on the radio, old school, and they were talking about the fact that as you watched Twitter unfold with this exchange that happened between a couple of celebrities, people initially were saying, wow, that was intense. And they were commenting that you could see people were waiting like, what am I supposed to think about this? They weren't even forming their own opinions or kind of taking one side or the other, waiting to see what the collective response was. And I'm just wondering if that's a phenomenon that is seen in young people when there's something like that. Like, I don't want to form my own opinion. I want to see what the collective belief system is. Do you know what I'm talking about?
100%. And I think this has also been a part of the decisive nature of like being on one topic or another topic, and how fractionalized some people get. And that's where I worry about. And I did hear that same report, that there was an initial pause to see how people would react, to wait for to see the tide of which way to kind of fall on. Because again, if you really look at that event that took place last night, taken out of context, it can be seen in one way or another way. So not looking at it as just one image. I don't know what was happening on with either one of them, but I know that there was a physical altercation between two people, and that wasn't something we want to promote. Are there any, somebody wrote in, are there any movies mentioned appropriate to watch with kids, or do you have any recommendation to watch with kids, young ones, who are starting to ask questions around technology, starting in middle school? In this vein, what do you recommend to establish parameters to get to go? Thank you. So that Netflix documentary, again, and I'm horrible with the name of it, is, what's the name of the documentary again, Kim?
The Social Dilemma.
Social Dilemma. I apologize. I always forget that. I'm okay with kids watching that, because guess what? If your young ones, especially in middle school, are already exposed to it. So know that that's an easy, not an easy one, but a one to start and to sit with and have that awkward conversation and to see what they have to talk about. Fifth graders, sixth graders, probably parts of it would get it, parts that wouldn't. But definitely when you get to seventh, eighth grade, absolutely, it's perfect to watch. I would lean more toward conversational pieces when it comes to younger kids, asking what they see in other kids, asking the kids, and not being afraid to have this conversation as young as 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, to say, what do you think of my relationship? And throw yourself under the bus and ask the kid, to start to critique you, I think is a really great way to have kids talk about it. So having conversations, not having all the answers, but having conversations and asking kids to say, well, how long do you think you should be on your device for? And then pulling the device out and sharing, because you can show how much screen time you're on your device for, and pulling that up and everybody kind of comparing notes is a great other way to kind of have that conversation, and for them to really see how much time, their energy they're spending on this device. So that's good. Was that answered, or was there another question that came up?
I don't think another one came up, but I was wondering, I have to rewatch this movie, but does anybody remember the movie WALL-E?
Yes.
The Disney Pixar?
Yeah.
I almost think that would be an interesting thing I just looked, it was 2008. But if you remember, humans physiologically changed because they weren't active anymore, because they were doing everything with technology. I wonder if I found it actually pretty disturbing. I don't know if it is a Pixar movie for kids, but I'd have to watch it again through this lens to see if that might be something.
No, it was a great shot, because the kid was on a conveyor belt and he had his, fast food, fed to them. And there was another movie called Game Player One, or One Player Game, or something like that came out as well. Player Game, I forget. But I'll look it up and I'll try to send it to Kim. But this idea is that, like, yeah, watching movies to talk about their relationship to technology while they're in a movie. So watching a kid's movie, even, yeah, like Wally, I think would be great. So it's good. All right. I wanted to make sure I gave time for questions, and then I was racing at the end, so I'm really sorry.
I think you make a great point, though, about Mike, about it's not all bad news, and it's not the devil incarnate here. You know, I mean, we're talking about sharing resources on our website, which is technology, and watching a movie, which is on we can stream, which is technology. So, and I also just had a conversation with someone who has a close family member with a child who has a lot of social barriers. They have a diagnosis with a lot of social struggles, and he happens to love coding. He's a young adult in his 20s, and he just got a job coding. And they were wondering, like, is this going to be bad? Because is it going to take him too far down that rabbit hole? But what are your thoughts about that? Like, if this is something that he's very comfortable with, is that necessarily a bad thing?
Not at all. Not at all. And again, I appreciate you bringing that up again, this idea that it's not all bad. And coding or having a gift and being able to know numbers or being able to know the world and have that feel-good sensation of something accomplished and then getting into it, it's a career. So, and again, technology is here. One of my favorite trends that actually, I don't know if you've seen yet, kids don't text as much as they FaceTime. And they'll have multiple FaceTime conversations going up. And I think it's a great thing because kids are really seeing each other and they're having some, nonverbal, verbal communication going on. And so many our youth are having, I have to see my lobbies when kids are coming back into treatment. I have to tell the kids in the lobbies, guys, can you do me a favor? Can you not have your phones on FaceTime, on speakerphone in the lobby? But they think that's how they're connecting and communicating, which I think is better than, the text. They're better than one word or better than that because they're actually seeing, and they'll hang out and just have their phones out and have conversations ongoing. So again, certain trends and things are just actually allowing people to be happy. And I know that families are feeling disjointed, disconnected, especially with COVID and worries about safety around COVID. So a lot of families were doing family functions online. So again, I thought, the timing of our abilities to be on Zoom, the timing of our abilities to utilize FaceTime, and then all of a sudden this thing shut us down. I think about it, like if COVID happened 15 years ago, if COVID happened 10 years ago, what would have our interactions been like? Now that we're getting out of it, it's seeing it as a utilization, seeing it as a healthy mechanism, but to not be afraid to get back to some of those old school mechanisms that Dr. Perez talked about, just sitting and reading an old school book and having that kind of interactive playtime as well. So that's all. So any other questions or thoughts on this? I really appreciate everybody's feedback tonight, and questions were awesome. So thank you for allowing me to participate tonight.
Well, I want to thank, before we close out, I just want to thank again the Upper Dublin Education Foundation for their support for this, the content and what you shared with us today. Michael was excellent. I learned quite a bit, and now I know the name for myself as a digital immigrant. I had not heard that term before, so that's very good. I'm glad I learned that term tonight, and I learned so much more about how this this over reliance or need for the technology could be masking some other underlying issues that we need to try to work on and cover. So I think that's really important as we talk continuously about our kids' mental health and about their coming back to school, having being socially perhaps a little awkward from being a year and a half, for some of them 2 years, doing remote learning, and to consider those pieces as well as we're kind of collaborating and working with them to help them understand the proper use of technology. So thank you so much. Thank you, Kim, Judy, as well. I'll turn it back over to Kim to close out.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the April 18th program with Dr. Fanko will be a perfect accompaniment to this, just talking about isolation, because I know that she shares quite a lot about her experience with young people, working with young people who, it's finding that balance once again, but it is an interesting topic to think about isolation these days. We've had a lot of forced isolation, unfortunately, and she's got some great insight, so I think it'll help a lot.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you to all our participants. I appreciate you taking the time tonight to join us, listen, and ask questions. Terrific.
Yes, isolation and scrolling go hand in hand, someone said. So true. Oh, hey, Michelle, thanks from the Ed Foundation. And don't forget to take the survey, please, at the end of this. I really would appreciate that. And thank you, Mike, and thanks so much, Dr. Perez. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Have a great evening.
Thanks so much, guys. I appreciate it. Take good care.
Thank you. Terrific.
Yeah. Bye-bye.